My 3-year-old pointed at the basement door. Why does the crying lady only come out at night? Kids say weird things, but Lily had been talking about this crying lady for weeks, and it was starting to freak me out. What crying lady, sweetheart? Lily tilted her head like I was the stupid one. The sad lady who lives downstairs. She comes up when it's dark and walks around our kitchen. She's looking for something. My stomach dropped. We'd lived in this house for 6 months, and I'd never heard crying from the basement. But kids have active imaginations, right? That night, I stayed up listening. Around 2 a.m., I heard it. Soft sobbing coming from somewhere below our kitchen. My hands started shaking as I crept to the basement door. The crying stopped the moment my foot hit the first step. I stood there in the dark silence, wondering if I was losing my mind. The next morning, Lily was coloring at the kitchen table when she looked up and said, "The crying lady likes you, Daddy. She told me you have kind eyes." I nearly dropped my coffee mug. Lily had never mentioned talking to this woman before. When did she tell you that, baby? Last night, when she was standing behind you at the basement door. I called my landlord immediately. Rick had owned this house for 15 years and acted weird when I mentioned the crying sounds. He stammered something about old pipes and house settling noises, but his voice got shaky when I mentioned the basement specifically. He said he'd come check it out later, but I could hear panic in his voice. Lily kept talking about the crying lady throughout the week. She draws pictures of a woman with long dark hair wearing a white dress, always the same dress, always crying. When I asked what the lady was looking for, Lily said, "Her baby. She lost her baby and can't find it." The hair on my arm stood up when she said it so matter-of-factly. I started researching the house's history online. The previous tenant before us had moved out after just 3 months, citing disturbances in his lease termination letter. The tenant before that lasted only 2 months. In fact, nobody had stayed longer than 6 months in this house for over a decade. Rick was clearly having trouble keeping tenants. Rick showed up that afternoon but refused to go in the basement with me. He stood at the top of the stairs while I went down with a flashlight, claiming his bad knees couldn't handle the steps. The basement was mostly empty except for the old furnace and water heater. But in the far corner, I found something that made me call the police immediately. There was a section of the concrete floor that looked different, newer, like it had been poured recently to cover something underneath. When I tapped it with a hammer, it sounded hollow. Rick started making excuses about renovations and tried to get me to leave, but I wasn't moving until the cops arrived. That evening, while waiting for police, Lily came downstairs and walked directly to the suspicious concrete area. She knelt down and placed her small hand on the floor. The crying lady says, "Thank you, Daddy." She says you're going to help her find her baby now. My blood went cold as I realized whatever was under that concrete had been trying to get our attention for months. Detective Williams arrived the next morning with ground-penetrating radar equipment. The scan showed a large hollow space under the newer concrete, along with what looked like 2 distinct objects buried beneath. Rick broke down crying when he saw the radar images. He confessed everything right there on my basement floor. 15 years ago, a young mother named Sarah lived in this house with her infant daughter, Emma. She'd been struggling with severe postpartum depression and accidentally overdosed on her prescription medication one night. When Rick found her the next morning, the baby had died too from neglect and dehydration. Instead of calling police, he panicked about losing his rental property and buried them both in the basement. They excavated the basement floor that weekend and found Sarah and baby Emma exactly where the radar indicated. The coroner determined they'd died from accidental overdose and neglect, not murder. But Rick was arrested for improper disposal of human remains, tampering with evidence, and obstruction of justice. He'd been covering up this tragedy for 15 years while renting the house to unsuspecting families. The crying sound stopped completely after Sarah and Emma were given a proper burial in the city cemetery. Lily never mentioned the sad lady again, but she did ask why the nice lady wasn't visiting anymore. I told her the lady had found what she was looking for and didn't need to be sad anymore. Sometimes I wonder if Sarah was trying to lead us to her daughter, using the one person in our house innocent enough to see her. Children notice things adults miss, especially when something desperately wants to be found. The dead don't always rest until someone cares enough to listen. We moved out the following month. The house sits empty now, but neighbors say it feels peaceful for the first time in years. Sometimes the dead just need someone to listen long enough to help them find their way home to where they belong.